Senator Craughwell.
Thank you. Taoiseach, you're welcome back to the House. Taoiseach, at the last meeting here, your colleague and spokesperson on defence in the Shannon raised a very important issue, and that was in relation to members of, for example, a GAA club or a credit union, where it is required that they state their occupation, would clearly be recognised and identified as a member of the Defence Forces. On foot of that interjection by Senator Wilson, I took independent legal advice over the last few days, and I have that advice here with me today, which I want to share with you. And I believe that in asking you to accept the amendments that we put forward today, we are protecting the human rights of the individuals who serve in the Defence Forces. The gagging order, as it has become known, was introduced into this bill in order to prevent members of the Defence Forces speaking out, but it is on foot of a High Court case taken by Sergeant Martin Bright with respect to a protest that took place in Dublin city centre some years ago. I think we're heading into dangerous territory by using a very blunt instrument to ensure that members of the Defence Forces can never participate in any form of protest, cannot be engaged in, for example, if they were the director of a credit union, that they would find themselves lobbying outside the gates of Leinster House, or if the credit union was sued, the person would be identified as a member of the Defence Forces because they have to give their occupation on the form. So I don't want to take up a lot of time on this. What I want to do is I want to share the legal advice with you. I want you to consider it. I'm publishing my legal advice, and I would ask you to publish the Attorney General's if you've had it, which is not an uncommon thing for you to do. You've done it recently in the case of the Taoiseach, published legal advice from the Attorney General. So I'm asking you to show me mine is wrong, because I don't believe it is. And I do believe that if you persist in bringing through this amendment, or sorry, this bill as it stands, I do believe it will be subject to judicial review in a very short time after it's passed, because you cannot limit the human rights. Our soldiers, sailors and airmen and women are citizens of this state first, and members of the Defence Forces second. And you cannot limit and tie them down that they have no voice at all, or that they cannot participate in what is normal social interaction for every citizen of the state. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Senator. Before I go to Taoiseach, can I welcome the members of the Kildare Active Retirement Group who are here as guests of Senator Mark Wall. You're very welcome. And Taoiseach, I was receiving instruction at the outset, and I forgot to welcome you to the chamber. So you're welcome.
Okay, Cahill, and I know you were joining with me in celebrating Cork's victory on Sunday.
Indeed.
For
I had no choice.
You had no choice in that matter, given your, and also to welcome the Kildare Active Retirement Group as well. Could I say to Senator Craughwell in particular that you persist in either misreading or deliberately distorting what's in the bill. The bill stresses while in uniform. While in uniform, or otherwise making himself or herself identifiable as a member of the Permanent Defence Forces, make, without prioritisation from the members of the commanding officer, a public statement or comment in relation to a political matter or a matter of government policy, or attend a protest march or other gathering, canvass on behalf of or collect, address a meeting of political organisation society. So, without prejudice to the Defence Amendment Act of 1990 and any regulations made thereunder, a member of the Defence Forces shall not, while in uniform or otherwise. And the fundamental point is to the apolitical nature of our defence forces. You accepted at a committee stage, and indeed at second stage, the primacy of a non-political and an apolitical defence force. That is what's underpinned in this primary legislation, and that is what has been in Defence Force regulations for a long, long time. Now, in respect of your legal opinion, I understand you shared it with some other senators. I read it. And I have to be clear with you, we don't comment on individual litigation cases, but the judgment in the Bright versus the Minister of Defence is now a matter of public record, and I can address the issues that arise in respect of any suggested impact it may have on this bill. The details of this judgment have been considered by officials in my department and are the subject of legal advices which have also been examined extensively and which I'm not commenting on substantively. It's important to highlight that, as set out in the judgment itself, if you look at the judgment, the issue under consideration is, quote, a difficult one and needs to be dealt with, quote, in a manner which takes account of the interests and sensitivities of all concerned. It's important to underline that the issue at the heart of this litigation was the nature and scope of an order that was issued by the Defence Forces in 2018. Insofar as the judgment makes comment in respect of the statutory provisions of the Act, the judge highlighted that it, and I quote, is open to the Minister to enact regulations which would make clear the circumstances in which members of the Defence Forces could or could not attend public events. In the proposed text of the bill, that is exactly what I am setting out to do, clearly and in primary legislation. It is essential, as I've said, to maintain the apolitical nature of the Defence Forces, and the text of the new bill sets out to enhance the clarity of Section 103 to ensure that the Defence Force members do not become involved in political matters or attend protests, marches or other gatherings while in uniform or otherwise making themselves identifiable as a member of the Defence Forces. I believe that's entirely reasonable and is in line with the judgment in the case of Bright versus the Minister for Defence. The judgment in Bright versus Minister for Defence highlights that the question, and I quote, of what members of the Defence Forces may or may not do off-duty in relation to matters which might be deemed political is a difficult issue. However, it is an area which requires regulation by the Minister, which takes account of the interests and sensitivities of all concerned, unquote. The proposed amendments to Section 103 address the very issue identified by the judge in this respect, and to do so while distinguishing between the constitutional rights of the individual person and the actions of someone while in uniform or otherwise making themselves identifiable as a member of the Defence Forces. And any suggestion that the judgment in Bright versus Minister for Defence somehow undermines or otherwise requires the removal of the proposed amendments to Section 103 fundamentally misunderstands, in my view, the question in the case and ultimately the issues in the question in the case and ultimately the findings of the judge. The High Court has not ruled that the rights of Defence Forces members to be involved in political activities cannot be curtailed or regulated by the Minister for Defence in any way. In fact, the judge stated that it is an area that requires regulation which takes account of the interests and sensitivities of all concerned, and that is the intention of the proposed section, text of Section 103. And I just find it difficult to reconcile your two positions, because how can we argue, or could we put it this way, are you suggesting that someone in uniform should be able to be on a protest march, or should be involved in political activity? I think that would be very serious for the Defence Forces, and how we've commonly and historically understood the role of the Defence Forces, given the very significant issue of the primacy of the civilian authority, irrespective of who's in government, of the Oireachtas, of the government of the day. And the Constitution allows for that, indeed provides for that.
Gormagat. What we've actually done is talked ourselves into a more confused state this afternoon. Looking at the amendment, or sorry, at the bill itself, Section 1A, without prejudice, the Defence Amendment Act 1990 and any regulations made thereunder, a member of the Defence Forces shall not, and if we go down to subsection C, address a meeting of a political organisation or society, but they can attend, because it's not specifically barred from attending. That's one of the things. My colleague Senator McDougall brought up one of the most interesting issues in relation to this bill, and that is he brought up a gay person being a member of a community or being a member of a committee and being a member of the Defence Forces. It's not that terribly long ago since members of the Defence Forces, unlike any other military in the world that I am aware of, were encouraged to march down O'Connell Street in Dublin and various other streets in the country wearing their uniform and wearing pride memorabilia or insignia on that uniform. There's actually a specific Defence Force Act or regulation that makes it illegal to desecrate your uniform. But it was done, and it was done for all the right reasons. Now, in the judgment by Sanfi talks about the prohibition of Sergeant Bright, a complete ban, he says. It makes no attempt to differentiate between the various levels of involvement in the event which were possible, from mere attendance on the one hand to involvement in the organisation of the event on the other hand. No indication of why mere attendance in civilian clothing was unacceptable was given. There is no indication or consideration being given by the General Staff to the effect that the members who would have wished to attend in the event, even if not participating in the... He goes on to say, in my view, it was a blunt instrument which went farther than necessary. There is no indication what the nature of the event the nature of the event was considered. Basically what happened was an order came down from the General Staff, you won't attend, and that's it. End of story. I believe in my heart of hearts, Taoiseach, and I served in not one but two armies. And I knew my place. I knew I could not speak out on political events. And I have never known a soldier to get involved in the political arena. I've never known a soldier to push himself or herself beyond what were reasonable bounds. Here was a man who wanted to attend a respect and loyalty parade which was about pay for the Defence Forces. If we go to the nth degree in what you're trying to bring in today, RACO and PD Fora are both political organisations. To be a member of the executive committee in either, you have to be elected. You have to go through a campaign. They are political organisations. They are there to lobby on behalf of their members. And at the end of the day, is it possible that I, as an executive member of RACO, go to the annual conference and I want to stand up and I want to in some way criticise government policy? Am I now in breach of this? You'll tell me today that I'm not. I have to live with the commanding officer who lives by black and white regulations. Senator Wilson's argument was brought up last week. I'm surprised at you, Senator Wilson, that you brought up that argument here. Did you not speak to the Taoiseach before?
Through the chair.
Well, sorry, Chairman. But, you know, clearly the Senator Wilson was aware that there was a problem here. And I'm just wondering, did this not come up in their own conversation at their own party meeting? Why is it coming up today? Why? It's just a sledgehammer. It really is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. There is absolutely no need for this. And I assure you today, as sure as I'm standing here, this bill will finish up judicially reviewed because you are taking away rights. You are taking away rights. Whether you like it or not, in the judgment on Bright, it's clear rights were taken away. There is European human rights, there is our own human rights in this country, there is the right, freedom to assembly, all of these things are built into our human rights. You can't gag an entire organisation. Our Defence Force members are great people in local organisations, local committees. I could bring you just 2 miles from here out to Killester, and there's a group out there that is headed up by a private soldier, and you want to see the work they do. It is just amazing. Is he now to be gagged? Because everybody knows he's a soldier. Everybody knows it. But he lobbied hard to build his community and build things for his community. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody knows what he is. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see this being rammed through today. And I really do wish that you would pause at this stage, go back and rethink where we're at. It's just, what you will do is you'll drive people underground. That's what you'll do. People will go underground in order to find ways around this, and that's not in the normal cut of soldiers. Soldiers like to do things, they like to be involved. Any community I know, you live in Cork, there's both the naval base and Collins' barracks in Cork. You had a relationship with it yourself in your younger days. Soldiers like to be engaged in their communities, they like to give leadership. If you're going to silence them, what are they to do? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't be a member of the committee because I'm not allowed to speak publicly. I can't attend that meeting because I'm not allowed to. Come on. That's not the case. Come on. It's there. It's there.
From the Taoiseach to respond.
Could I just say at the outset that, I mean, it's outrageous to say, as you have said, Senator Craughwell, through the chair, that a member of the Defence Forces can't become a member of a committee in a sporting club or any organisation. Nothing changes in that respect. My own club in the Rangers benefited enormously from military personnel down through the years who helped us to win All-Ireland club championships and so on like that. One came from Kildare, Shea Fahy and the late Seamus Collin, and I could go on. And there was no problem with them turning up at an underage committee or turning up at the management committee, and there will be no problem in the future in respect of matters pertaining to the club and how the club should be organised, and that will stay. Please accept that much at least, because senators are talking about confusion. Like, there's nothing changes in that respect. And then like, all of this was in defence regulations. We're now providing clarity in the form of primary law. When a soldier took an oath, they took an oath not to become engaged in a political matter. But I would say that, in terms of the phrase you used earlier of a gagging order. It's not a gagging order. And in terms of the representative associations, they are representative associations, and the bill expressly relates to the Defence Amendment Act of 1990, without prejudice to the Defence Amendment Act of 1990, and any regulations made thereunder, a member of the Permanent Defence Force shall not. In other words, it's without prejudice to that Act, which basically established the representative associations. So let's be clear, there is nothing stopping, or there's no hindrance or no undermining of the role of the representative associations to represent their members. And that is enshrined in legislation. What this bill is about actually is creating the framework around an additional advance on 1990, which is association with ICTU. That's what this is about, which is a good thing. They'll now be involved in national wage negotiations and so on. That's a positive advance. Future generations may advance even more. I take Senator Cloonan's point that the whole idea of freedom of expression and developing an intellectual tradition within our defence force is something that I would encourage. And within the defence forces, there is a strong learning tradition, dimension in terms of all the various courses and programmes and postgrads and dissertations that members engage in. And I had good experience of that recently, or last year when I went to the Curragh, for example. It was outlined to me in terms of some of the studies that people have been doing, a lot of them in the military domain and some in the social domain, in the mental area, sort of mental health, mental well-being, all that area, which is of use to subsequent, to the formulation of military policy into the future. And I would be very open to the idea of linking up with academic institutions. Now, it seems to me chain of command is involved here, and this might be something I would suggest to you that we could return to in the context of other legislation. Because when we talk about cultural transformation, it's something I've been reflecting on for the last year and a half. If you take the independent review group, if you take the work you did 20 years ago, and if you take, and I met with the external oversight body during the week. I met about 7 or 8 of the members just to talk to them about their experiences today. And Senator Wilson made a very good point last week about talking to the grassroots. Well, they've gone to barracks, they went to Collins Barracks, they met about 100 rank and file, randomly selected and engaged with them. And their biggest feedback was there's still not a belief on the ground that cultural transformation will occur. So we have a huge challenge within the Defence Forces to convince people that cultural transformation will happen. And I think what you've suggested today is an interesting dimension in terms of how we could progress that. And I think the chain of command structures in itself lends itself to a rigidity that may not be conducive to that cultural transformation. That's a view I have, but it needs further thinking through. But I think that's more within the structure of the Defence Forces itself. I think Senator Wilson's point about, again, a member of a credit union, you're a member of a credit union, you're not out there sort of, you fill in a form and you say, my occupation is X. You're not out there sort of saying, I'm identifying myself now as a Defence Force to seek reform and to attack the government because of its financial policies. No, you're not. You're a director outlining your occupation with a view to contributing to the community and being involved in the community group. Nothing changes in that respect. And that is clear in our view, and has to be the position. We want community participation. And to me, the Defence Forces has always represented a very significant human capital to the country. Because I see many former members of the Defence Forces, when they leave, they're very effective members of the community leadership in many organisations. They have tremendous engineering, many have very good engineering, logistical capacities, organisational capacities, which have been deployed in the interest of community associations, community activities, projects, event organisation, and so on, like that. And